Space Arena.
Ground Arena.
Saga Podcast.
And welcome back to Space Arena, Ground Arena, Saga Podcast, where we cover Star Wars Unlimited from the ground up into space. I am Mr. Ben, and this week I'm joined by Banana Crapshoot.
Yep, I'm here. I'm glad I can hear you this time. The name of this episode is going to be Technical Difficulties. I'm happy to be here and finally getting going.
Well, and much like our number of takes, we have 3 crew members. Kennedy, good to see you.
I am here. I'm excited to be here and can't wait to talk about some Star Wars Unlimited.
Okay, well, before we get into the card reveals, let's maybe May the 4th just happened, which I think qualifies as a holiday for nerds like us. Do we maybe want to talk about what we did over May the 4th? Kennedy, you want to start?
Yeah, so I was at a card game convention for another game. I was at the Con of Heroes for Marvel Champions, but don't worry, that doesn't mean I didn't play a lot of Star Wars Unlimited. So the place the convention was at closed obnoxiously early on Saturday, like 7 p.m. So we had arranged a Twin Suns sealed tournament with a bunch of Star Wars players there. So we played with 3 boxes. We each opened 8 packs and made a 40-card Twin Suns deck, and then played through 2 rounds of Twin Suns. So 3 pods of 3, and then the winner of each table played at a winner's table. And it was hilarious and awesome and super fun. And then throughout the rest of the weekend, every time I saw one of those players, I was like, do you want to play this Star Wars game? I like this other game that we're here for, but there's this other game in my backpack. And we probably played more Star Wars than we were supposed to at a Marvel convention. The Twin Suns games were epic. I could talk about them for hours, but like the highlights were in my first game, I had a super laser tech, and my opponents didn't like that. So they entrenched it. But I had Tarkin as one of my leaders, so I said, fine, I'll start pumping this guy with experience. And he got to like a 10-9. It was ridiculous. And then we had this stalemate where no one could flip a leader because as soon as they did, that super laser tech was going to kill him. So my opponents made a pact, an unspoken pact, where they were both going to flip in, or so I thought, and then I was going to have to choose one of them to swing into. So the first one flipped in, and then the second one vanquished my super laser tech. And I was so sad to have this 10-9 super laser tech die that in the heat of the moment, I forgot to even make him a resource. So after like 6 turns of our entire table stalling, we were all at 13 resources. It became just a shootout. And I won that game by using Change of Heart on Wampa to kill an opponent's Saw that they played the turn after, and then snuck in to the winner's table. And in the winner's table, I had the opposite experience. It was obviously the people that had won the first round, so they had pretty tuned decks, or they had figured the secret of their deck out. And I played it. I was Krennic Tarkin was my team, and I played a Grit Trooper, the little scout bike trooper, pretty early on. He got a bunch of experience on him from Tarkin, and the opponents worked together to get rid of him, which was very annoying. And then one of my opponents played a Grit Trooper, and played a Fallen Lightsaber on him. And he had this like 8-9 monster that was just smacking me in the face. Because I had no Sentinels, I had like nothing left. I had been kind of ganged up on because I was ahead, which makes sense. And they got me to really low HP. I want to say I was at like 4 hit points. It was crazy. But both my opponents were at like 29, and I was able to negotiate my way out of it. Because if one of them murdered me, the other one was going to win because they would be able to attack their base more. So they slowly chipped away at each other while I kept playing units that had no consequence. And then eventually I buffed Krennic enough that we were all looking at each other's health, and my 2 opponents were like, we're both at 10, what are you at? And I was like, 16? Because you've let me heal 6 times. And I snuck the win out with that one as well. They both had, we played where you could put Vader or Luke in as well, kind of like the pre-release. So they had both flipped their Vaders in. They each had a Vader. I needed one of them to kill the other one's Vader so I could power the dark side the second one, which is what happened. And then my giant monster Krennic with Restore was able to take in the win. So I went from 4 hit points to 20, and then they knocked me down to 15 after I eliminated one foe. So it was pretty epic. I was glad we played.
Twin Suns is a lot of fun.
Twin Suns is super fun for like a social convention style thing. So what about you, Mr. Ben? What did you play?
So my store had a couple of boxes that they held back, and they did like a lottery to be able to play sealed. So anybody who came in and played at any of the Hobby League scheduled times or just throughout the week, every time you came into the store and played at least one game, you got your name into this lottery. And then they drew names. I think there were 28 total seats, something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was busy. And it was all the rest of the product that the store had, as far as I know, unless they have another secret stash somewhere. And it was my son's first opportunity to play draft. So he was super nervous. I was thrilled to be able I got like nothing good in my draft, but to be able to do a draft was really awesome. And my kid not only didn't make any mistakes, he was so worried about dragging down everybody. It's so easy to screw up pack passing. And we like drilled it. Like, here's good habits to have to make sure you don't make a mistake. And while his pod did get messed up, it was one of the other adults who messed it up. It wasn't Wit, which a note of order if you're playing draft, put your cards back in the pack paper so you don't accidentally pass the wrong stack of cards in the middle of the draft. Uh, but my kid won out the day. He did great. My record was not so great, but man, it was a good time. It felt great to be able to crack some packs again. Uh, and shout out to Geek City, my local store, for everybody who got in for the product that was available. They sold it $5 a pack. You just paid for your packs to be able to participate, which is really cool. One guy pulled a showcase too, which was awesome. I was really hoping that was going to happen, and it did. So, how about you, Banana? How was your weekend?
It was good. I didn't get to go to any May the 4th Star Wars events. There was a local 1K here, but my 8-year-old participated in his first archery competition. So that was pretty cool. It was like a 3D archery, so they had like a bunch of like different animal targets set up on this indoor range. There's like 30 targets. He ended up going fourth, but it was his first competition, and he improved from like his qualifying score to his, like, they called it like a shoot up, like when you're shooting for prizing. He increased his score by like 80 points or something. So he did very well. So that was my weekend. I played a lot of Star Wars Unlimited, but not at the store.
Well, and with that, I think we should dive into our cards because we got a ton of cards to talk about. And
Yeah.
completely antagonistic to the spirit of getting through this quickly, I want to go back and talk about a card that you guys talked about last time without me because you were both so wrong, and I can't I can't let it go. This Pike Sentinel, this 2-cost 2/3 with Sentinel. Everybody's saying this card is going to be good in control, and you're all wrong. This card is not going to be good in control. This card dies to literally everything aggro plays on turn 1. 3 defense is not good enough to survive, and 2 attack is not good enough to take those aggressive units with it. So it's not going to do anything helpful for you. I'll prove it. As a control player, if I'm Thrawn, I am in a better position by just saying claim and spending no resources at all on turn 1 so I can exhaust your turn 1 play. If that card compares unfavorably to just claiming and not playing anything, it's not going to be a good card. Okay, I'm done. You guys can rebut if you want.
We will see in a couple of months when you're wrong. That's all I'll say. Why not
Fair
play
enough.
this and exhaust the unit, right? We'll find out. Time will tell.
Well, now we're talking about a turn 2 play, and that opens up even more things that it's worse than. But I'll let it go. Let's talk about some actual new cards that have been revealed since we last recorded. I'm going to start with Hunter. This is a command heroism affiliated clone. It has a action of pay 1, exhaust it, reveal a resource you control. If it shares a name with a friendly, unique unit, return the resource to its owner's hand and put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. Once you get up to 7 resources, he becomes a 5/8 unit and has on attack, reveal a resource you control, all that other stuff I just read, as well as overwhelm. We'll start with Kennedy. What do you think of this leader?
I think he's great. I think when he got revealed, people were less convinced because they didn't see other combo pieces that he's clearly designed with. But we know that a 5/8 body is really strong at 7 resources, right? Vader's really hard to get rid of when he flips when he wants to. And a 5/8 body with overwhelm built in is probably also going to be really strong. His on attack, I think, is going to be fine for card advantage, right? You can always play over that unit and discard the old one, or hold that card, or use it as a resource in the future and sort of build your hand slowly with his on attack, or even with his other ability, right? You can sacrifice and be more liberal with the use of your units as you're gaining this card advantage. So I think he's going to be great, and I'm excited to see what other pieces come with him.
I don't know what I think. I don't. How can I say this? It's not that I don't understand what he does. I just don't see the matrix with him yet. So I don't. For me, it's kind of hard to evaluate my thoughts. I think the deployed side, the 5/8 with overwhelm seems pretty cool, but for like his action and his own attack, I'm not seeing the matrix there. So I'm not quite sure where he's gonna fit.
I think if there's ever a card that gives you added bonus, like added synergy for returning cards from your row to your hand, that cards like this and Lando start to look better. Uh, his powers seem very forgettable to me, but 5/8 with overwhelm, and if you're trying to do stuff with clones and he fits into that strategy, I could see him being played just on the basis of being a 5/8 overwhelm that deploys on 7.
There was, I think, if there was a mechanic in this game, like in Versus System 2 PCG, where you can like discard other cards to buff like the same card, then I could really see a lot of value there. But I'm not seeing the matrix there. So maybe I'm just not smart enough to figure it out. But I need to see more.
I mean, it is fair to be able to be like, oh, I can row this 8 cost card early, and then yeah, and then get it back. Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm really good win played abilities that you want to be able to recycle with units that you already have in play. I'm not super thrilled with them though. Bosk. This is a aggression villainy leader with an action. Exhaust him, deal 1 damage to a unit with bounty. You may give it +1/+0 for the phase. He deploys on 5 and becomes a 4/6. When you collect a bounty, you may collect that bounty again. Use this ability only once each round. Banana, what do you think of Bosk?
I like Bosk. This one I get. I like his stat lines probably more what a 5 should be. I like the flexibility of the action on his front side. So if your opponent plays a bounty on you, like you can buff your own dude to give it +1, and then being able to collect the bounty twice, readying more resources. I think is one we saw, right? Wasn't there one called Wanted that lets you ready resources?
Mm-hmm.
So being able to do that twice seems pretty strong. I think Bosk is pretty cool. I'm looking forward to building and playing Bosk.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit. I think he's a little bit slow for a aggro leader, right? If you want to use this and include a bunch of bounty cards in your deck, you have to spend an action, deal a damage to them, then the next action you can use to attack with that unit with that buff. That's going to be a little bit slow, right? It gives your opponent the chance to remove that attack. But I'm really excited about his deployed side. When you collect the bounty, collect that bounty twice. I think that's where the big bucks for Bosk are going to be. I always find it interesting, those leaders that have different abilities on the two sides, kind of like Chirrut and Chewbacca. So I'm excited to see how that plays out differently with Bosk.
I think this guy's hyperspace is likely to look the best ever. Like, this art is fantastic, and I can't wait to see the full art of it. Mechanically, it's fine. I I agree with everything you guys are saying. Bo Katan Kriz. Aggression, heroism, affiliated, action. If you attacked with a Mandalorian unit this phase, deal 1 damage to a unit. Deploys on 6 and becomes a 4/7. With on attack, you may deal 1 damage to a unit. If you attacked with another Mandalorian unit this phase, you may deal 1 damage to a unit.
I'm lukewarm on Bo Katan. Obviously, a tribal leader. I guess the closest comparison I come up to is like Tarkin, even though they're completely different, since they're like very tribal leaders. Tarkin can give that experience token to anybody, and then Bo Katan, if you attacked, like there's very specific things you have to do to get the 1 damage to a unit. So I don't know how relevant that's going to be. I think she completely hinges on how good the Mandalorian tribal is, and if that one damage a couple times a game is worth it or not. So I'm not too excited. I'm excited she's in the game, but I'm not necessarily excited for this card.
Similar thoughts. I don't think she's great. Maybe she'll be better once we see more Mandalorian cards, but a tribal leader that kind of locks you into things with the stat line she has, but not deploying till turn 6 just feels like a worse version of a lot of cards we have, right, that aren't tribal, right? Boba Fett has the same stat line and comes out a turn earlier. That's crazy to me. So that ability really needs to be worth it to run over something else that could be just as good, if not better. So I'll be excited if we get enough Mandalorian supports to make this strong. But I think tribal leaders will get stronger the further into the game we get, is my guess.
You guys are probably kinder than I want to be. If you if you look at the power of being able to deal damage to your unit as kind of like an aggressive power, it sure, but it's just worse than Sabine. So she's a slower but more durable in the aggressive space. I don't think we want either of those things. If you want to use that one damage to control the board, I don't see how this kit really supports any kind of like a control plan because you've got to attack to really even be able to access it. Now you're forced into maybe not being able to be patient with your resources because you've got to push attacks to be able to get to this control effect. There's just much easier ways to control the board. Are you going to build a mid range around that? I don't know. I don't really like anything that's happening with this card. Maybe once we see the full Mandalorian suite, I'll change my tune. But at this moment in time, I mean this is like Jin Urso. This is something I'm probably not gonna play. Moving on to something that I think I might actually play, a 7-cost Vigilance Villainy affiliated First Light Space Unit. This is a 4/7 with grit. Each other friendly non-leader unit gains grit, and you can smuggle this card for a cost of 7 and dealing 4 damage to a friendly unit. So you can play this from your row for its printed cost, but that added drawback slash potentially benefit, given that you're giving everything grit, of dealing damage to a unit.
Made to go in Tarkin, right? Seems really, really strong in his deck. For the most part, I'm still pretty lukewarm on Smuggle. In theory, it's my favorite mechanic, but at least this one is the same cost from hand or row, minus the dealing 4 damage to a friendly unit. It could be a great finisher, but I'm not convinced that I'm going to love it yet. So, we'll see.
Yeah, this is one I think I need to see more. The each other friendly non-lead unit gains grit tells me like you want to maybe go wide with this, or maybe just play one other big body with it. But for 7, how many other at that stage of the game? How many other big bodies are you going to be able to play? So I think this is another one that I'm not trying to take the easy way out, but I think I need to see it and play it. And I haven't played any of the set 2 stuff yet.
Well,
I haven't been doing proxies of it.
What you said, I really agree with. By the time we get to 7 resources in this game, your 7 resource body has to have an immediate impact on the game. And if it doesn't, that's trouble, right? So maybe you do this and you trigger a when defeated effect on one of your other units or something like that. But a 7-cost unit that's likely just going to get vanquished or removed somehow doesn't leave me in a wild space.
Right. Like the reason like Dooku sees plays because he defeats something when he's interplay.
Exactly.
And this just gives stuff a keyword. Like Home 1 is similar since it gives everything restored, but it also does something when it enters play.
So I do think this is going to demand like a pretty narrow use case for it to look cool. I don't know that this is going to be a great card to find in your sealed or draft packs, but I think the idea of we're in these later turns in the game, our hand is depleted, the opponent comfortably claims initiative, like, oh, what could they have left? There's not much. And then you play this thing out of your row, deal 4 damage to whatever 6 cost or whatever card you played that's still up and ready to do something. It gains grit, it gets a +4 damage buff. I've seen how much work +4 damage buffs can do. Like, that's a big number. I realize I'm describing a very narrow situation, but in those situations. Like I was pretty down on Krennic initially when the game came out, and I've seen how grit can actually function pretty well as a keyword, and I like the idea. We know how much power giving ambush to a unit that's not supposed to have ambush can have. Grid is a little bit more passive. I get that it's not as strong as that, but it seems like interesting design space, and I really like cards that reward you for being able to kind of time out your opponent into an early claim that lets you then sneak a big attack through. And I think this has the potential to do that. And given how big of a buff +4 could be, that could be a game finisher depending upon how you set it up. So I'm excited to play around with this one. Although I agree with you guys, it's probably going to be pretty narrow, and at 7 cost, it unless you're hitting a unit that can swing in with a big attack, it's probably too passive. Gentle Giant. This is a 6 cost vigilance heroism affiliated 2/8 Wookiee with grit. On attack, you may heal damage from another unit equal to the damage on this unit.
I like Gentle Giant. I think it's cool. This is, it might be too late in the game, like as a 6 drop to play it, but the 8 health is ridiculous, and the on attack ability while you're pumping the grit and being able to heal like your Chewbacca leader that is a couple damage from dying is pretty cool. So I like the potential of this unit.
I like Gentle Giant a lot as well. I'd love it if he had Sentinel. We got ways to give him Sentinel, right, with upgrades, so that's fine. I'm a big blue heroism or vigilance heroism fan, so I think he fits right into that deck. He's giving us more options to not just go the force unit route in blue heroism, which I think is important. So I'm excited to see where he goes. 8 health is a lot. It's real hard for things to chew through. It'll go really well into mid range as you build up this grit monster that can take out 2 or 3 things. But probably too slow to be very helpful versus aggro, which is what you expect out of a control deck. So seems to fit pretty well.
I predict that this guy is not going to do much healing. I just don't see any reason for your opponent to attack into this thing to give it damage rather than just killing the other units. Like, if you have a unit that has damage on it that I could kill, why would I attack into this thing and then let you heal the damage thing? I just don't like. It's almost like he has like the opposite of Sentinel. He has like attack repellent because I don't want to swing into this guy. Now, once he's damaged, okay, maybe I'll send in the finishing blow. But the turn you play him, I have a hard time seeing people teeing you up to get a big heal off of this guy. That said, blue heroism is probably some of the cards I've played the least in the game, and you guys are more experienced in that area than me, so I will defer to your judgment on this one. 6 cost pirate battle tank. Command villainy affiliated. This is a 4/6 sentinel with a smuggle cost of 7 command villainy. So you pay 1 more to play this thing from your row. In my opinion, this is the kind of smuggle costs I would like to see, like smuggle as a mechanic. Yes, I get to hide something in my row, and it kind of sits there until the turn that I want to play it, and I pay a slight penalty to get that thing out after having it be safe from Spark of Rebellion, Forced Surrender, Smoke and Cinders, etc. That said, do I want to pay 7 cost for a 4/6 with Sentinel? I'm not sure that I do.
I do not want to pay 7 for a 4/6 with Sentinel. That's a pretty bad body, right? I could pay 7 for a Luke or for something else. So I can't remember what's in green villainy at 7, but it's got to be better than this. So
Darth Vader.
yeah, Vader, right?
Darth
yeah, there you
Vader.
go. I don't play a lot of green villainy anymore. But I mean, it's just such a bad stat line for 7 that I don't see the smuggle being super relevant. These cards that look like this make me think that the smuggle is going to be relevant when we're on like turn 23 and both of us are top decking. Cool, that's great. Like that's a useful thing, but cards that are that edge casey don't seem to do it for me. So I'm a big great draft card. It's going to be awesome in draft to be able to play this and then or resource it and be able to pop it out later when your hand is depleted because you have an unoptimized deck. But in constructed, I don't see myself playing this much.
I think there's better options for, like, I guess Command Villainy doesn't really have a 6-drop, but I think you just go without a 6-drop and keep wait till Vader.
Ramp past 6.
So One other angle that Smuggle can produce value from is is a card that can't be milled. So once your deck is gone and those dirty blue players think they've completely exhausted all your resources, surprise! I have another unit I can play from my row. Didn't see that coming. Given the way the meta has kind of shifted after the Florida results, that might be a little bit more value for Smuggle. Something to consider. Clone Deserter, 1 cost, command, heroism, 2/3 with restore 1 and a printed bounty of draw a card.
I think it seems like a pretty solid one drop. People like that Luke command deck, and I feel like this is a good option as a one drop in there. It could be a 2/3 with restore 1 and a shield. So I think it's pretty cool for a one drop. I think it's going to be a great card in limited, and I think it'll have a place in constructed.
Nothing new. I agree. Exactly what you said. It's going to be a staple in clone decks, right?
And possibly fringe decks.
I'm not sure how relevant restore is going to be on a one drop, but if clone decks tend to underdrop and want to go a little bit wider, potentially this card enters play later in the game as well, and you don't feel punished for it, and you can actually get some value out of that restore. I'm not sure the restore matters though. Just 2/3 for 1, even with the drawback of letting your opponent draw a card, that all seems pretty fair to me.
Yeah, I don't think the bounty's that big of a drawback, and the restore might not be relevant, but if you're thinking about that Luke command deck again, they're playing like U-wing reinforcement and stuff, and they can drop a whole bunch of stuff. And maybe this is one of those things that it becomes relevant late game. Vomit a bunch of units like that. It's probably not a great target, but like Rogue Squadron Skirmisher can pull this back from discard. So I think it could be relevant, but definitely early game it's not relevant at all, obviously. But just the 2/3 for 1 is pretty solid.
Yeah, what you said, U-wing reinforcement is where this fills out. The number of decks I try to build with the U-wing reinforcement, where I want 2 3s and a 1, and I draw a bunch of 3s but no 1s. This gives me a few more targets to try to get that spread where I put 7 full resources onto the board and it's 3 bodies, which is what I always want out of that card.
Let's move on to Echo. This is a 4 cost 4/4 command heroism affiliated ground unit with restore 2. And when played, you may discard a card from your hand, give 2 experience tokens to a unit in play with the same name as the discarded card. Gosh, these clone abilities are wordy. I almost wish they had some way to like say keyword, like a keyword clone, say, to mean unique cards that have the same name as this card, but I guess that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, well, so first of all, it's not a unique unit, so it's different than Hunter. If you had 2 clone deserters, you could drop a clone deserter and buff them up, so that's pretty cool. And clearly, this card was made to synergize with the Hunter leader we talked about earlier, right? If you have a unit in play, you can return that unit from your resource row to your hand and replenish them, and then do what Banana said, and just like in Versus System, turn that into 2 experience tokens on a unit. A card for 2 experience tokens, I'm not sure if the payoff is perfect, but a +2/+2 permanently is pretty good in this game, is what I've found with experience. So I'm pretty excited for Echo. I think he's going to be really strong. I think that he's going to go perfectly in that Hunter deck. He's got the stat line I want. He's got a cool restore ability. He's going to get stronger as the game goes on, and we can have more different copies of characters, right? The uniqueness rule is like if you have 2 different subtitles on Leia, they can both be in play at the same time. So eventually, when you can make a deck with 40 copies of Leia in it, Echo is going to be like, give Leia +2/+2 when played, and that'll be really cool to see. So that's the bright, sunny future in set 72, but it could happen someday. So I like Echo a lot.
I think Echo's pretty cool. His stat line seems very fair. Restore 2 on a 4 cost unit is cool. And yes, I like the ability to do the versus like experience +1/+1 play. I like that, having that on a card. So I like Echo. I think he's solid. The Hunter stuff's whatever. I still gotta play it and see it to understand it. But that is a thing that I think will work. But I think Echo's a cool card.
In limited, the when played probably doesn't matter at all, and I think he's still fine. Like a 4/4 with Restore 2 for 4. I think I'd probably take that in draft if I was on these colors.
Probably not going to play him in Twin Suns much.
Yeah.
So maybe like later sets, a singleton format with a dude that's looking for cards with the same name. Probably doesn't
Yeah.
make the cut there.
Yeah, it seems like the whole clone set might not be the most Twin Suns friendly cards, but that's okay. All right, let's move on to the Reputable Hunter. This is a 3-cost, 3/4 command ground unit. If an enemy unit has a bounty, this unit costs 1 less to play. So it can come into play as a 2-cost, 3/4. 2-cost, 3/4 is some great stats. That is undeniable. How big of a drawback is having to have a bounty in play to get that discount?
It's going to depend, right? If the meta shifts to these low-cost units like the one we just talked about, Clone Deserter, where people are playing units with bounties turn 1, and you can have this as your turn 1 drop going second, that's amazing. This is a really good card to play going second, turn 1. And we've seen a ton of other units that have bounty on them that people might want to play early. That's the time to play them, kind of, when the game is not out of control already. That being said, typically, if your opponent knows you're running this, they're not going to play those bounty units. You're going to have to spend a card from your hand to get a bounty on the board to then get a 1-cost reduction on this unit. I've seen a bounty that costs 0 wanted from the preview article, right? So you could, in theory, in command cunning, play wanted on your opponent's first turn play, and then you play this guy as your first turn second play. But you're now depleting 2 cards from your hand to get that onto the board, which is risky, right? But either way, a 3/4 body is pretty great. I think he's even like a not horrible 3-cost body, so that's probably where you're going to end up playing him most, is on turn 3 or on turn 2, resource turn 3 rather than the first turn.
I think for a 3-cost, I want more than just the 3/4. Like the stat line's fine even at 3/4, but I still think I want something else to happen. I think if you play him for 2, it's a home run, but I think if you're playing him at 3, you're probably playing in draft or sealed. I think if you're playing constructed, you're probably going another direction unless your deck is built around bounties and you can very consistently play this for 2.
All right, let's take a look at Take Captive. This is a 3-cost command tactic event. A friendly unit captures an enemy non-leader unit in the same arena. So you get to take something for 3. I mean, I play cards that cost 3 that let me take an enemy thing off the board all day long in Villain Vigilance. This isn't quite as good as Power of the Dark Side, but in a lot of cases, it'll be similar, and you get to pick the unit rather than the opponent getting to pick the unit. So that pesky Sentinel that you have to get out of turn just to push through some damage, this seems like a playable card to me.
I'm not as high on it. I haven't seen enough bounties to make this worth it. I still think that since those units can come back, it's a temporary tempo loss, which is a lot worse than a permanent tempo loss. Feels pretty similar to Cunning, but even with Cunning, your opponent gets to like respend the resources and play the unit. Here they're going to get that unit back for free if they're able to remove your unit. So in a lot of games, you might take captive something, and then they might immediately open fire the unit that took captive and get their unit back. That's going to feel pretty bad. So I'm not sold on this being crazy yet. I do think it'll be a good card for decks that trigger off you capturing things or things being captured. But it's not my favorite removal that we've seen so far.
This reminds me a lot of Strike True, where like it's not a great removal spell, but sometimes you got to play it, and sometimes it is value. I think this is the same thing just for capturing stuff. It's probably not the best way to have removal or to capture, but it's what Command has to do that, since that's not their main shtick, right? Like dealing damage directly to units is more of a aggression thing with like open fire and force choke. I'm thinking the capture mechanic is mainly going to be like a cunning sort of thing, and Command does it, just not as good. So that's why I think this reminds me a lot of Strike True. So I think it's okay. I think it'll see play sometimes, but probably not everywhere.
3-cost. Aggression, villainy, affiliated, Death Watch Loyalist. This is a ground unit for 3. It's a 3/3 with grit and overwhelm. 3 cost, 3/3 grit, overwhelm.
I love this card. This card's awesome. The art's good. Grand Inquisitor gets very happy that it can, swing for 5 with overwhelm. The turn is played. I like Death Watch Loyalist. Like the 3/3/3 is whatever. The grit plus overwhelm, and the thought of what you could do with it with like Grand Inquisitor deck has me very happy.
Yeah, I like this guy too. They've already told us that Mandos are going to kind of focus on upgrades. So the thought of upgrading this guy, even with something like an Electro Staff to make him a 5/5 grit overwhelm, is pretty crazy, right? Especially if you're using upgrades that give you even resilient, right? A 1-cost upgrade that gives you +3 more hit points. That's going to mean you can really buff the grit up on this overwhelm monster. And again, like all units with grit, that means your opponent has to attack into your grit unit, or you use your grit unit to delete multiple of your opponent's units, which is great because this one has overwhelm. So I really like Death Watch Loyalist. I'll be on the lookout to see somebody use this with Krennic and Death Trooper so that you can play this on your resource turn 3. And then on resource turn 4, you can immediately Death Trooper it. And now you've got a 6/1 thing with overwhelm that if your opponent can't remove is going to do a lot of damage.
Seems like a solid card. Notably,
card.
it's Mandalorian and Trooper, so there's going to be tribal synergy with those 2 different keywords. Decks that care about Troopers. This is a guy that they want to play. Mandalorian, yeah, he seems like a solid unit, as well as the tribal synergy. Is it Tag or Taggy? I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name, actually.
Ajay.
Tajay, yeah.
I just made that up. I don't know.
That's the. I was gonna say the
I was
exact
just being
same thing.
snooty.
All right. He must be French. All right.
He
Ruthlessness.
drinks tea with his pinky
Yeah,
up.
there you go. This is a 1-cost aggression villainy upgrade. It gives +2/+0 to the unit it's attached to, and the attached unit gains when this unit attacks and defeats a unit. Deal 2 damage to the defending player's base. I guess this is one of those upgrades we were told Mandalorians would be receiving. Do we think this one is worth playing?
I'm not sure. For one, the +2, like when this unit attacks and defeats a unit, like getting the 2 damage to the base is awesome, but I guess that happens even if the attached unit dies, because it doesn't say when this unit completes an attack. It just says when it attacks and defeats a unit. So I guess it's cool. I think upgrades, unless they're super impactful, are a little too slow, and I think this might fall prey to that it just might be a little too slow. But a 1 for +2 is fine. I mean, I don't know. I just don't see it, I guess. I guess I'm not crazy about it. Seems okay, not crazy about it.
I don't like upgrades that don't have hit points. When I play an upgrade and it doesn't give me hit points, that just means that you can kill 2 cards for 1, typically, right? So getting +2/+0 means that they're probably going to swing into this unit and remove it, and yeah, they'll get removed on the way back because you have this attack buff. But that's just normal trading, right? Now you've traded a worse situation. So I think it could be a really cool card, and it's probably going to have decks typically like you would play this when you have a ready unit and your opponent has already claimed and you only have 1 resource left. But like you said, +2 for 1 could be a pretty good trade, but you can also do that with precision fire, and you don't have to worry about the upgrade getting removed right afterwards. I do think that this card could be pretty good because it can be played on leaders. It's not limited to Mandalorians or anything like that. So you could play this on a Darth Vader, and now Darth Vader can attack, swing 2, and then defeat a unit and deal damage to base, which could be pretty brutal. So I would be looking for leaders that have big hit point butts to play this on, but probably not removable units on the board, which is sad because those are the things you see more frequently.
I am even less enthused about this card than you guys are. I think if I open a pack and this is in my rare slot, I'm going to be grumpy. This card makes no sense. It wants you to get the bonus. it wants you to attack into a unit, but it gives no bonus to your unit's defense. So it's not really I don't like it at all. Like I would rather have a card that just lets me attack into the base for the 2 damage than to try to
Yeah.
get the 2 damage to clear a unit and then get this ping thing going up. No, I don't want this card in my deck. I don't want this card in my limited deck. I don't want this card in my constructed deck. I don't like this card.
The only situation I think this works well in is overwhelm units, right? You're probably trading that overwhelm unit and maybe losing it, and this basically reads +4 attack on an overwhelm unit. That's really good. But yeah, not.
Okay.
The art's gonna look cool in hyperspace, but yeah.
I'll grant one use case. If you
All
have
right,
entrenched my unit, then I will play this on my unit and not feel like a complete loser.
You entrench your own unit with overwhelm
go.
and play this. Here we go.
2 cost, aggression, heroism affiliated ground unit, Ketsu Onyo. Not totally sure how to pronounce that. 3/2, Saboteur. When this unit deals combat damage to a base, you may defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less.
I like it. We needed more upgrade removal. I'm glad that it's in red. I think that's a good color for it to be in. It's conditional but non-conditional. It reminds me a lot of Seventh Sister, right? Sneak into damage on base and then get some bonus, but you play this a lot earlier, right? So I think 3/2 with Saboteur is relevant either way, just to get by Sentinels, and the when this unit deals combat damage to discard an upgrade is just bonus. So really great for getting rid of those entrenched that people might play on your units. So
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I was gonna say the same thing about removing entrenched. I like it. The 3/2 for 2 and Saboteur. Good stuff. I'm a fan.
Heroism aggro decks already play a 2/3 with Saboteur. A 3/2 is a better stat line for an aggressive deck, so this is a unit that aggression, heroism, aggro decks want to play anyway. The added benefit of potentially liberating one of your units from an entrenched, I think, is just icing on the cake for an already. Really, the only drawback to this unit in aggro is that it's unique, and you might have an awkward hand where you don't have other units to follow this up with. And that's like such an like I'm really reaching for something to say that's like a negative about this. This card is excellent. I think this is great for the kind of decks that it's supposed to go into. It's everything you want in an early game aggressive heroism unit. It's fantastic. Night Owl Skirmisher, 3 cost, aggression, heroism affiliated ground unit. It's a 4/3 with smuggle, and its smuggle cost is 5.
my same opinion holds true here. Do I really want to pay 5 resources for a 4/3 vanilla? No.
Nope.
Will I in very edge cases? Maybe. Probably not even then, right? I'll probably have better choices in my hand that I just drew into. So am I really going to run a aggression heroism control deck that tries to go to 12 resources? Absolutely not. So I'm never probably going to run this for its smuggle cost. It'll always be played on turn 3, and then it's just an inverse, what was he, reputable hunter. Instead of a 4/3 with no ability, it's a 3/4, or other way around. So not crazy about it. It's got the Mandalorian and Trooper tag, so that's at least worth something, but probably one of my least favorite Mandalorians that we've seen previewed.
I'm out. Not a fan. The smuggle cost stuff is ridiculous.
These smuggle costs are getting out of control. Inflation.
This one's ridiculous. This is completely unacceptable.
Uh,
All right, let's move on. 4 costs. Aggression, heroism affiliated, 4/5 ground unit, Koska Reeves. On attack, if this unit is upgraded, you may deal 2 damage to a ground unit.
I don't know. I don't know what I think about this one. 4/5 is cool. If this unit is upgraded, so Mandalorians, right? They said they want to do upgrade crap, so could be cool to splash some damage around. I'm guessing this would trigger if there's a bounty on Koska Reeve, so you can make your enemy pay for that. So I think probably cool in a Mandalorian deck. Outside of that, probably not as cool.
I think this kind of tells us what the archetype they're trying to go for with Bo-Katan is, right? It's to get a lot of splash damage onto units, and remove units by attrition that way, right? Soften them up so that when they trade in, they're either sure to be gone, or remove them with Casca and Bo's ability. I'm not sure it'll work out, right? The action economy in this game is so fluid that when I attack and damage a unit, my opponent's going to get use out of that unit right away before Bo-Katan gets to trigger her ability. And now I've spent multiple actions getting rid of their unit while they still got their value, which doesn't feel great. So will it be in those archetype decks? Probably. But will those decks be too slow or too combo driven to be successful? That's my guess. So kind of down on this loyal night owl, just like her friend, the skirmisher.
Do I want to invest additional resources into a 4/5 blank? No, I do not. So the payoff for investing additional resources into that forgettable body is almost irrelevant to me. I don't want to do it in the first place. I'm not interested in playing this card. Wrecker, 6 cost, aggression, heroism, affiliated, 7/6 ground unit. Overwhelm. When played, you may defeat a friendly resource. If you do, deal 5 damage to a ground unit.
Heroism ECL just got real, right? You can ECL this thing in, and it is a steadfast battalion without having to have your leader in play that also hits something else in the ground for 5. That's insane. Like, this card is bonkers good. I expect this to be in every deck that's running red-green heroism, that's running aggression ECL. ECL is their base, right? There's no reason to not try to ambush this dude in and do crazy amounts of things, whether it's finishing the game, removing a threat, removing 2 threats, or whatever. It just seems like a really, really, really good card. And I like the idea of defeating friendly resources for these really powerful effects, because they should be game swinging to put yourself back on the curve like that.
Yes.
I like this card a lot. I think it's pretty ridiculous. What little people were playing Gorilla Attack Pod are never going to play Gorilla Attack Pod again. This thing is just bonkers all around. And I'm surprised it's not like a Smuggle 37. Everything you said, ditto. Bonkers card.
This is great. Towards the top, we talked about a 7-drop that didn't seem like it was necessarily going to... Like, I really want to like that card. This has so much more immediate impact than that 7-drop that we talked about, and it costs 1 less.
Yes.
This is a top-end game finisher for those Sabine aggro decks. This is very good. It's a very good card.
I like it a lot.
Okay, let's cripple authority. This is a aggression, heroism, trick event card. Cost 2, draw a card. Each opponent who controls more resources than you discards a card from their hand.
I think this is a great tool to give aggro decks that have been getting pooped on by the ramp decks. And now they have their answer to the ramp decks. Oh, you're going to ramp? Well, now you can't play your cool stuff. So I like it. It's a cool tool. I think it's probably more of a sideboard card than a main deck card, but I think it's cool. I'm glad we're going to have it in the game.
Great card. I'm excited to see tricks not in cunning. I'm sad that they aren't useful with Jabba because they're involving the heroism aspect. But I think this card followed up by a spark can deplete your opponent's hand real fast. So a Cassian deck that's running this and all the other discard tricks we have between aggression and cunning could be really brutal. I'm excited that we have the card. I agree with Banana. I've seen really, like in the last month or so, how strong Forced Surrender can be, where you get a 4-card swing, but that costs 6. Here we can get a 2-card swing much earlier in the game, and it can even work against aggro if they're it's if they have more resources, not if they have more cards. So it can even work against, mainly for aggro against control. I think that's great. I think it's exactly what they need, and I like it.
Knowing that aggression, and I get that it's aggression villainy, but knowing that aggression has force throw already, it feels a little irritating to me to have to pay 1 more to discard a card from my opponent's hand in this conditional way. But this card replaces itself, and certainly paying 1 resource to get these effects packaged together, it is almost certainly worth it. I think force throw sees play. The added value on that card is harder to achieve and probably less overall useful and reliable than just the card replacing itself. So yes, took me a little bit of a walk to get there, but I do think Cripple Authority is a card that I could see myself playing for sure. I'm not sure that aggro is going to have the time to sort of spin their wheels in that way, but for longer game decks that really want to deplete the hand, I think that this is a tool that heroism could get some work done with. Force throw gets some work done for the bad guys, and this is a very similar tool.
I think mid-range might use this into control as well, right? You
Mhm.
can decide, I'm going to stop resourcing on turn 6 when your opponent has to go to 7. Now they have more resources than you. If you have initiative, you can immediately nuke the other card in their hand, and now they're down to no cards in hand, and they're just top decking into control events the next turn while you're going face in mid-range. So I think that's like the place that I see it being the most useful. But I'll be excited to see if that works out.
The Clan Challengers. This is a 5-cost aggression ground unit, 3/6, raid 3, and overwhelm.
Hey, it's another great ECL target for Mandalorian aggression decks. Go think about it. Raid 3, overwhelm, 3/6, all looks great. In general, I'm not a huge fan of raid just because you don't get that ping back sting, right? Yeah, you can remove your opponent's unit with overwhelm. You're probably getting removed the next turn in an unfavorable trade, so that doesn't make me wild about it. At the same time, like a 6 hit point butt with raid is pretty good. Hopefully you last for a little bit. The overwhelm is also cool, but conditional, so we'll see.
I like Clan Challengers overall as a card. The first thing I thought of when I saw this was, ooh, this is another Grand Inquisitor target because it's 3 power or less. So being able to hit for 6 with Overwhelm the turn you play it seems pretty cool to me. I think this one's going to look awesome in hyperspace. Overall, I think this is a very solid card. For some reason, the 5-drop single aspect cards just seem to hit right, like Steadfast Battalion. Now we got the Clan Challengers. Like, I think it's pretty solid.
Notably out of takedown range, so that's really important. The first thing I thought of when I saw this was a Force Mandalorian split deck where you can use the forces with me with these guys. So you make them into a 5/8 with a shield that gets raid 3 that gets to perform an attack when you play that event. That seems bonkers.
And then it has the Overwhelm because it was updated.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so it's just crazy. We'll see.
This reminds me very much of another red raid unit, the Green Squadron A-Wing. Admittedly, the A-Wing comes out earlier, so if it feels a little faster, but this kind of fits into that same shell as having a little bit weaker printed attack, but the raid making up for that. And once you factor in the raid ability, you're getting above rate for what you're paying, just like with the A-Wing. Overwhelm is icing on the cake. Is that enough to, like, if I'm on an aggressive deck, do I want to play this and have to wait a turn to swing with it? Or kind of like Steadfast Battalion really wants that ECL? This may really want that ECL or that sneak attack, some way to attack the turn it comes into play. And in those cases, I think this looks excellent. And it may be good enough even without the sneak attacks and the ECLs. Moving on to IG-11. This is a 5-cost aggression affiliated ground unit. He's a 6/5. If this unit would be captured, defeat him and deal 3 damage to each enemy ground unit instead. On attack, you may deal 3 damage to a damaged ground unit.
This card's kind of wild. There's a lot of stuff happening here. I think it's pretty cool. He's protection against capture if they do try to capture him, or if there's a way that you can choose, like if there's like a power of the dark side, but for capturing, where you have to choose one of your units to be captured. Like you choose IG-11, and then he's basically a mini bombing run. That seems pretty cool. 6/5 for 5 seems all right. I think he's a cool card. I just I don't think he's going to be very main decky unless capturing is everywhere and you can choose him to be captured as the player controlling IG-11.
Yeah, until we get something that proves that we can sort of choose what thing can be captured, I'm just going to consider that capture ability to be mainly blank, right? Someone would have to be super desperate to do that, and it would have to advantage them, like they have no ground units out to decide to capture IG-88. His on-attack ability is really, really good for characters that want to have damaged units. We're looking at mixing this with Mandalorians so that Bo-Katan can ping things and then IG-88 can slam into them. Could be a great ECL target, right? If something's already damaged, he can swing at a second thing and then kill that first thing that you were thinking about. But overall, just a pretty good stat line card. So I think he'll see play, but I don't expect to trigger that passive text very much.
There's this thing that happens in Versus where they give us these cards that have text on them that are absolute flavor home runs. Like there's a Mephisto that has the ability to make a bargain with another player. And the problem is, like, this is just never going to happen in a game. Like, maybe, okay, kitchen table, maybe. But this is even worse than the Mephisto bargain example I just went to. Nobody is ever going to capture this dude and give you a bombing run. Clearly, this is designed to be flavor around the character of IG-11, and that's cool, but yeah, I agree. The passive ability is basically blank. His on attack is cool. I think Vader would like this guy, so this is probably a playable unit, but there's a lot of words on this card that are just irrelevant. Covetous Rivals. This is a 6-cost aggression affiliated ground unit. It's a 5/5 with grit, and when played and on attack, you may deal 2 damage to a unit with a bounty.
All right, people are going to be sick of me saying this, but this is another great ECL target, right? On play and on attack means that if you ambush this in, or I guess I won't say ECL, what's that other new card we just learned about? Timely intervention target, right? If you bring this in with ambush, you can deal 4 to a unit with a bounty. It's going to kill a lot of units, right? You can ping the shield off the doctor and then start chipping away at him. You can take down a lot of those early cost ones that let you draw a card or ready a resource. So I think that this card will see play if we are in aggro heavy metas that have those cheap units with good stats and bounties built into them. And I think they'll be pretty good. These generic cards like Steadfast Battalion and Covetous Rivals turn out to be shaping the Star Wars Unlimited universe, which I find to be very funny.
I think how good this card is and how much it sees play relies entirely on how relevant bounties are in the meta.
Feels like a tech card against a bounty heavy meta, and historically speaking, in a lot of games, tech inclusions that cost 6 generally don't see a ton of play. So I'm kind of lukewarm on this guy.
Tauntaun lukewarm, or
I'm not convinced this card is going to be that great. Let me put it that way. Maybe if it's a bounty heavy meta, maybe. Moving on to the 2-cost cunning heroism affiliated ground unit L337. This is a 2/2. When played, you may rescue a captured card. If you don't, give a shield token to this unit, and he has a smuggle cost of 4, so his cost doubles.
People play Crafty Smuggler, right? And that's a 2/2/2 with shielded. This is basically that. So, I mean, if you can put more of those in your deck, or light side or heroism focused ones of those, that could be good. Being able to rescue a captured card could be super relevant again in a capture heavy meta. Right, we talked about that 3-cost card that captures a unit. Well, if you can then play a 2-cost card to bring it right back into play, your opponent just wasted 3 resources while you built board. Seems great. Smuggle cost, ridiculous. Redonkulous. Hate it. Hate everything about it. But a 2/2 to bring a second body back or to be a crafty smuggler is pretty good, right? The big problem I have with crafty smuggler is if I draw him later, he just becomes a resource, because I don't really want to play a 2/2 on my 7 resource turn. But I might not mind rescuing a captured sentinel or something else that my opponent got out of their way for only 2 costs later in the game, so that I can do other shenanigans like Spark of Rebellion or whatever else. So I think it'll be an okay card in a capture meta, and it'll be an okay card in general early game, but probably another resource or later game.
would you play 4 resources for Crafty Smuggler?
No, but I'm not saying I have to pay the smuggle cost, right? I'm saying I'd play it from hand later. I wouldn't pay 3 resources for Crafty Smuggler. I don't like cunning, so I wouldn't pay 2 resources, but that's just me.
There's so many 3s on this card, and they're just in the wrong spot. I think a smuggle cost of 3 would have been totally reasonable. It's not something you want to do, like, but it's I had to row this early. I don't have anything else to do, and here's an outlet with a small penalty to get a slightly sticky unit into play. I think all that could be reasonable. I like thinking of this as a crafty smuggler with this flex into dealing with a capture meta, but at smuggle cost of 4, if you're in the situation where you're doing that, what does the rest of your turn look like? I it's just too much. It's too much of a penalty.
I think that I would pay the 4. Now that you said that again, I think I would pay the 4 if it rescues a card that's important. Right? Late game, if someone's capturing like your bomb, and this lets you say, cool, you captured my bomb, he comes right back out, and I have resources left, that's huge. But that's going to depend on capture being important. So I'd only play the smuggle cost if I get to capture a unit. Certainly not if I'm just taking the shield. That seems very bad.
All right. Omega, 2 cost, cunning, heroism, ground unit, 2/2. Ignore aspect penalty on the first clone unit you play each round, and when played, search the top 5 cards of your deck for a clone, reveal it, draw it. We've seen these search the top 5 cards of your deck units see play. This one having the added bonus of ignoring the aspect penalty to get a clone, so it's kind of a mix of like Hera and Mon Mothma. If you're playing clones, this seems like a tool you probably want.
Yeah, I think this definitely goes right in. Like the clone deck, it's the mini Hera ability to ignore the aspect penalty, and you can, pull the clone you want. So I think pretty solid in a clone tribal deck for sure.
Yeah, agree. I think it's another great U-Wing target, right? We've already seen Mothma fill that slot. I don't know if I like the 2/2 line better than the 1/3 line that Mon Mothma has, but I think I do like it a little bit better. One attack is just something about it rubs me the wrong way on my turn 1 play or my leader turn plays. In other card games I play, like One Piece and some other things, like the little things you can play turn 1 that search the top 5 for whatever you needed for turn 2 are really, really strong. And I anticipate as we get more archetypes in this game, that will also be the case. But I think that the 2/2 body is much better suited for those cards, so that they have a little bit of punchback. Because when someone plays Omega, they're probably not going to last very long. The Omega's going to get defeated, right? So I'd rather do 2 damage back than 1 damage back and still die in one swing.
I think if you're playing clones, you probably play this. The Mon Mothma effect, it's worth it. I don't know if the aspect penalty thing is going to be as relevant, but I have to think it can't hurt. So yeah, does the C play outside of clones? No, probably not. Okay,
It does let you sneak Crosshair in from Villainy, so you can assemble the whole Bad Batch, which is cool.
well, flavor win for
Relevant.
sure.
Relevant.
3 cost, cunning, heroism, event, spare the target, return an enemy non-leader unit to its owner's hand, collect that unit's bounties. This is just like a waylay bonus. Waylay is good, so yeah, this seems okay.
Yeah, I mean, those Sabine cunning decks that like to run for a cause to believe in, now they get a waylay to run that doesn't mess up their heroism counts. So, seems good. The bounty thing, for the most part, again, is just going to be an added bonus. But if we get something that reduces the cost for heroism cards or triggers off playing heroism cards, then this is just a better option for those types of leaders. So, I like it. Will I run this and waylay? Probably not. I don't think I need that much unit bouncing in one deck, but maybe a dirty control player will. So
Yeah, better waylay for heroes. Nothing really else to say.
Yeah, I agree. You probably don't run this and waylay. That seems like a lot. 4 cost, cunning, affiliated ground unit, chain code collector. He's a 4/2 with ambush, and on attack, if the defender has a bounty, it gets -4 attack for this attack.
This card's very interesting to me. The ambush with that on attack, like to have disarm on a stick, is pretty cool. He can trade into some things, but that 2 health, I mean, he gets taken out by a wet noodle. So I think this card's pretty interesting. I think it'll be fun and limited for sure. And constructed, I don't know if it has a spot. That 2 health is like, that's super low. Make an opening, just axes it immediately, dies the removal, so it has to be bad. That on attack ability is very interesting, but it is also very limiting because they have to have a bounty. So it's an interesting card, but I think maybe set 2 limited is where it'll see the most play.
I think the card to compare this to is Takedown. Uh, Maybe sometimes once every 2 months on a Tuesday when it's raining, uh, you'll actually be able to get the on attack to trigger and you'll get to kill a thing and then also kill the thing that they throw into this to get rid of it. I don't think I care about the two. I think this is a 4 cost removal for Cunning. Cunning could use a little bit more. There's a lot of disruption in Cunning, but not a lot of clean removal. I think this comes out earlier than Bosk and Lackeys. It's not going to hit as hard as Lackeys, but people are paying 5 for Bosk to put 4 damage somewhere, and a lot of times he dies when you run him out. Obviously, the chain code collector is going to die to a lot more things than either of those 2/5 drops, but I don't think that's the relevant part of the card. This is a kill a thing with 4 or less remaining health in the ground arena, and that's an effect that Cunning probably could stand to use. 7 cost Cunning ground unit, Fennec Shand, 4/6 with ambush, and on attack deal 1 damage to the defender if it's a unit for each different cost among cards in your discard pile.
Love it. I love everything about this. It is a great control, board state control unit for Cunning at that 7-8 cost slot, which they did not have. Better yet, it's neutral, so it works for both heroism and villainy sides. I think this card is going to see a ton of play. It probably takes a lot to set it up, and you've kind of got to work on setting that up. But with someone like Han, where you're trashing a resource every turn, you can really set yourself up so that when you play this unit, you have exactly the right cards in your discard pile to be able to ping something for 7 and not take any damage back, which I think is very strong.
I also love this card. I think it has a lower floor than like the Han unit that basically has like first strike, but I think it has potentially a higher ceiling depending on how your deck's constructed. I really don't think like maybe this will see play in heroism, but I think like that mono yellow boba is where like this just slots right in because it doesn't have anything really to handle like other boba leaders or like Vader leader or not Vader leader necessarily, but like the Vader unit. Um, Anything over 6 health is a little difficult without uh like surprise striking or bouncing effects. So I think Fennec as a 7 drop in like that mono boba deck is like it could be there to help be a closer.
Hallelujah. Give me some things for villain Cunning to do on these high drop turns. Chimera ain't it. Fennec Shand is much better than the other options that we have as far as Cunning top decks on the villain sides of stuff. Uh, Maybe not as strong as some of the other heroism or other aspect 7 drops, but this is definitely playable. I like this card a lot. 1 cost Cunning event, Maklunki. Return a friendly non-leader underworld unit from its owner's hand. If you do, deal 3 damage to a unit.
I love that they made McClunky into a card. It is amazing. And also this card makes L337 better. Because that's an underworld card. So you could play it, rescue one of your own units, and then McClunky bounce back to your hand so you can rescue something else and deal 3 damage to something. So I think McClunky's a pretty cool card. If there's powerful when played effects tied to underworld cards, I think McClunky will see play.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of relevant underworld cards that like to be bounced back to hand. So just looking at the first set, we've got Gamorrean guards. They can take some damage. You can bounce them back to heal them. Both Bosk and Boba Fett themselves as big bounty hunters that you might want to bounce back. There's some neutral cards in Underworld as well, right? So Greedo himself could top deck this or get bounced back to protect him. That crafty smuggler that loses its shield, a pirated starfighter to be able to bounce another unit back before a board wipe. Or my favorite, I think, is going to be Syndicate Lackeys, just a 5/4 with ambush on turn 5, right? Crash into something, typically it's going to get crashed back into at the start of next turn, but if you McClunky it back to your hand, then you can just play it again and use that removal all over again, which to me seems really, really, really strong. I'm excited that the card is here. I think it's going to be really cool. I just noticed something while we were reading this card that changes my opinion a little bit on Spare the Target. It's Spare the Target isn't an exact copy of Waylay, because Waylay can bounce friendly units back. So in another card game I play, their set 2 meta had a character archetype that was all about bouncing cards back to hand, and you would try to bounce cards with enter the battlefield abilities back to hand and use them over and over again. And it turned out to be a super grossly abusive ability that was super, super strong with ambush-like units. So I could see this having a spot in those decks that have a lot of ambush underworld units, so that you get double the value off that ambush underworld card while your opponent starts to run out of opportunities. Another trick for Jabba too.
Pay 1, deal 3 is definitely a good card. This is not quite that. This is going to require you to pay something else to get the underworld character into play. It feels like it could be a little clunky. At the same time, if there's any aspect that is going to make bouncing units pay and pay off for you, I think cunning's probably the correct aspect for this type of effect, although I'm not totally convinced this card is where it's at. Relentless Pursuit, 3-cost cunning event. Choose a friendly unit. It captures a non-leader unit that costs the same as or less than it. If the friendly unit is a bounty hunter, give a shield token to it. It's sort of like a Waylay, kind of. They can get the unit back without having to pay for it again. Probably getting stuff out of the way is very useful. Being able to get that one sentinel out of the way to push for damage, pay 3, get the problem unit out of your path. I can see it having some play. That said, this one requires a lot more setup than just a straight Waylay would. So, do I want this rather than just Waylay? I guess it's going to depend how much like capture synergy I want in my deck.
I think if you get the shield, it's definitely worth it. If you're just capturing something for 3, and then, right, if you play something on your first turn at 2 resources, and then the next turn try to capture whatever your opponent played immediately, that would be great, except your 2 cost is just going to get traded into at the 3 cost, so it doesn't feel great. But if you get that shield token, you remove that unit for a little bit longer, which can be really important. So while it's more conditional than the command card we looked at earlier, Take Captive, I could see this synergizing better within the cunning card pool, just because you have a lot of bounty hunters, and getting that shield is super relevant because the thing that now is holding the captured card is a little bit more protected. So I like it in that case, but I'm still not. I'm not convinced on capture. Maybe I have to play it first. We'll see.
I agree with what you said. I think it's cool if you can get the payoff to get the shield. Otherwise, I think we gotta see some more to know what like the going rate for a capture is. I guess the command version, right? Take Captive was 3 costs, and you don't have the option to give your dude a shield. So, it's better than the command one, I guess.
Moving on to a 3-cost tech. This is a heroism affiliated ground unit. He's a 2/5. Each friendly resource gains smuggle. The gained smuggle cost is that card's cost +2, and its aspect icons, and his smuggle cost is 4. So only +1 from his printed cost. I think this card is illuminative of what FFG thinks the cost of smuggle should be, which is +2. And I disagree. I think +2 cost is probably too much most of the time for smuggle.
Yeah, I agree. +2 most of the time is probably too much. I think the +1 on him is probably right. Given every resource smuggle is cute, and I don't know how practical it's actually going to be. I guess it's cool you could give set 1 cards that didn't have smuggle. But then thinking like, what would you play +2 for? I think he might end up being a trap.
I think he'll have decks that he works in, right? +2 is just the aspect penalty. So if I'm willing to play, this isn't a good example because he's heroism, but overwhelming barrage for 7, then being able to play it later in the game but resource it earlier and then play it for 7 is still okay, even in a command villainy deck. So if we get heroism cards that have that same feel, right, I think that'll be okay. I think the smuggle tax of 2 is too high until you get to really high cost units. Like, I'll pay 9 to play a Luke Skywalker out of my resource row any day. The problem is tech has to live until you have 9 resources open to be able to play that Luke, which is a lot harder. So decks I see this working in are decks that actually have those big bombs, because the 2 tax right on a 7 cost unit is a much lower percentage tax than it is on a 2 cost unit. I don't want to pay double resources for a 2/2 body, but I'll pay that tax on a higher body that's going to stick around and have an immediate effect, right? You can turn a ton of those enter the battlefield, kill thing cards into immediate like removal from your resource row at a higher cost, which is super relevant in late games that drag out. The other place I could see this being useful is in an aggro deck that runs out of gas, right? If you are on resource turn 6 or something like that, and you're a Sabine deck and they've just drained you of cards, but you've almost got the win in play and you didn't draw into a for a cause I to believe in, you could play a tech and then try to add something else on top of that. So we'll see how it goes. Oh, my lights just turned off. That's weird. I'll bring it back.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of cards that have been revealed by other folks, but we're not yet done because we have a couple more cards we need to talk about, and these are cards that are going to be revealed by us. Guild Target. This is a 0 cost aggression affiliated upgrade. It gives +0/+0. The attached unit gains bounty. Deal 2 damage to a base. If this unit is unique, deal 3 damage instead.
I think it's a pretty cool bounty that you could play when you're looking to trade units to get a little bit more payoff off of getting that trade, because you're also now dealing damage to base. And if you would have this on a unit and then you hit it with overwhelm, you can get even more damage through the base. So I think it's cool. Again, we got to see how relevant bounties are, but I think one that gives you a payoff for trading into a unit by dealing extra damage to base is cool. I like it.
I
Dan?
agree. I think it'll work really well with overwhelm units, but typically, like, low costing cards that deal damage to base are wanted by aggression decks or aggressive decks, not aggression the aspect, but like go to face decks. And those decks don't really like to trade into units unless they have overwhelm. So while this will be great with K2SO and the Mandalorian we saw earlier, that's the 3/3 with overwhelm, I'm not sure it's going to have a real good home in a lot of aggressive decks. It does mean that it makes it harder for your opponent to trade into your like aggro units, right? So if they do decide to trade into you and lose their body, you still get some free damage. But it seems to be not a super high payoff for the card out of your hand for an aggression player.
I like that this card's 0 cost because that means it can fit into an aggro archetype and it's not pulling resources away from getting units on board dealing damage. Like Sabine can keep doing Sabine things. And now here's a card, maybe most of the time you row it because things don't line up, but on those turns where you have the action economy, where you can throw this down on a unit, yeah, I agree. If you're on aggro, you do not want to trade into a unit. You don't have any interest in doing that, but you know your opponent does. You know your opponent wants to hit your units. And I like the idea of giving them this sort of disincentivizing bounty. It's like, well, I could remove that unit, but then I'm going to take 3 more damage and lose my guy. Okay. Maybe I'll try to race the aggro player instead of trading. So this is the kind of card that puts mental pressure on your opponent to take the line that's more favorable to you as the aggro player. I think that's cool. I like the idea that this is a no-cost upgrade that you could, in a real nasty pinch, throw down on one of your units that's going to get some kind of a buff from being upgraded. I like the idea of bounties being free. And I like that this one isn't something that your opponent can play around. You know, we've seen some bounties where it's like ready resources. Well, if all your resources are ready when the bounty gets triggered, that feels terrible. There's no playing around this one. If all the base is on the damage, you already won. Or all the damage is on the base, you've already won. So this is a bounty where your payoff, unless they just straight up defeat the upgrade somehow, and even that, if you're playing a confiscate or a Fang Fighter to get rid of this bounty, I don't feel too bad about that either. So out of the bounties we've seen, I feel like this one has the most reliable value, and I can see the most use cases for it because damage is just so much more reliable than, or so much more important than a lot of the other things we've seen bounties do. I'm gonna try to say this. So this is a 5-cost aggression villainy affiliated ground unit, and his name is Stanton. Stanton, I think. He is a 3/7 with a wind plate. If an enemy unit has a bounty, you may ready this unit. And on attack, choose a ground unit. You may deal 1 damage to it for each damage on this unit.
Well, I think he's pretty cool. I'm waiting for my 2-cost Wookiee tribal card now to go with Gentle Giant and Chewbacca. That'll be sweet. His when played ability is going to be relevant, right? It'll be nice to get this unit ready on turn 5, especially if you're playing a bounty heavy deck with someone like Bosk or something like that. His on attack will be cool, but he's going to have to sustain damage and live for that to matter. So I think that we'll see how that works out. Might work well with that 7-cost unit you were mentioning earlier, right? Play this earlier so that you can ping this for 4 and then later attack with it. It'll gain grit and all sorts of craziness, so I could definitely see a combo deck going with this. Just not sure how often his on attack is going to go wild versus him just getting removed before you actually get to do it. So, to be seen for me, but I like him. I like the art. Real cool.
I like this card. I think it's very, very cool. I like how they're playing with like the Wookiee theme, right? We've seen Wookiees with grit. This kind of has grit, but not really. I like him. This is another one that I saw and was like, ooh, Grand Inquisitor, because he has 3 or less power and he's got 7 health. So if you can play him and you ready him, right, you can get 2 swings with him and deal like 8 total damage the round he enters play, because you can do 6 to base and 2 to a unit from the Grand Inquisitor ready. And at that point, it's kind of like a mini Vader leader where he's dealing 3 to something and 2 to something else. So I think he's cool. I think he'll work well in Grand Inquisitor, and I'm, other decks too. But I think that's just the first one I always think of because he has 3 power.
I like this guy a lot. The card art is fantastic. I know another card we have, the fire spray. It's kind of widely considered that if you don't have the Boba Fett to make it come into play ready, the card's kind of not great. I don't think this card suffers from that drawback because your opponents are not going to want to crash into this guy with their units unless they've got the full 7 attack. And there's not a lot of things that have a full 7 attack. So you play this guy. I mentioned like the opposite of Sentinel earlier, like attack repellent. I think your opponent is not going to want to trade into this guy in pieces to get him cleared unless they can guarantee that they're going to kill him without letting him get that attack. So the turn you play him, even if he doesn't ready, I bet they leave him alone. And then on turn 6, you get to swing into something, potentially kill it, get a little bit of damage, do your Grand Inquisitor shenanigans to stand back up and then attack. Again, using that card we talked about earlier to put 4 damage on this guy. Imagine putting 4 damage on this dude and then being able to swing in with that, plus the damage that he deals for that. So that's 8 out-of-pocket damage on top of his printed. There's so many fun things that I want to do with this. I will acknowledge 5 starts to be very expensive for an aggressive deck, so I don't know that this guy is going to have a home in like actual aggro. This strikes me as going to be more a card that is going to be kind of part removal in like maybe a mid-range deck that has like a bounty sub-theme. That's kind of the home I think he's going to fall into, but I'm excited to find out. I think this card looks like a lot of fun to play.
Great card to go with McClunky, right? Take a bunch of damage on him, use his attack a couple times, bounce him back to hand, and then play him again, but have him ready. Seems good.
And you deal, another 3 damage from McClunky, so just damage for everybody.
Yeah.
Huge shout out and thanks to FFG and Xander at FFG for providing us a couple cards to preview for the community. They don't have to do that, and they go out of their way to make sure that they're building that relationship with the community. So we very much appreciate that.
Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun to talk about what we can do with Kurstadtin. Man, that name is tough.
Make good choices and good luck in your store showdowns.
Play Chewbacca.
There you go. All right. Well, until next time, we'll see you in the arenas.